Welcome to Cartoon Creators, where we talk to the minds behind the shows that raised us. I'm your host, Tamar Lilienthal, and today we're talking to Ellen Doherty. Long before becoming the Chief Creative Officer of Fred Rogers Productions, Ellen began her career on the show we all know and love, Reading Rainbow. She went on to work on many other series, including Cyberchase, where she spent many years filling different roles both on the broadcast television side and in digital games. We talk about her career, how she transitioned from live action to animation, and what it's been like to keep the legacy of such a giant of our industry, Fred Rogers, alive. Let's get to the episode. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So we always start off by asking our guests the same question, which is, first of all, how did you end up working in kids media? Was this always your plan? We've heard a lot of no's that it wasn't people's plan, so I'm curious.
Oh, well, it was my plan as of college.
Oh, awesome. Cool.
Um, I think going into college, I thought about, I guess, journalism and advertising. I didn't know anybody who worked in TV. That wasn't like something that seemed like an actual job. You know what I mean? Like I just never thought
Yeah.
about it. Like so I was a communications major at Boston College, and my parents' point of view was get a good liberal arts education and figure out what you want to do, which was glorious to have no pressure on that. And so I kind of took all the classes in my major, which included sort of uh, intro to writing, advanced writing, like script writing, intro to journalism, advanced journalism, intro to advertising, advanced advertising. Like, and then there was more like novels into film and other like specific courses.
Yeah.
But what that let me do was sort of find that like yes, I liked the writing aspects of journalism, which I had, done school paper and yearbook in high school. And advertising, I liked the idea of really having words and pictures and thinking about that whole thing. And in small bites with advertising, I guess. And when I got to TV production classes, I was like, oh, this is interesting. This kind of like puts together all of this stuff that I have kind of liked. I was always somebody who liked to make stuff
Yeah.
and put together plans and do little creative projects. And so the sort of TV piece of it came together, and the kids part of it followed soon along. I think that my mom was a math teacher, a high school math teacher. We had other educators in the family. And so the idea of kids and teaching and education was sort of always in my brain somewhere. But I
Mm.
think that I wanted to be like a classroom teacher. Um, and through several different things happened during the course of my college career. One was that I had a summer job at a big box store in Michigan called Myers, which, if you picture Target, that's basically what it's like.
Okay.
I just got assigned to the toy department, like just got hired and got assigned to toys. And that was awesome because it led to, my being immersed as a, I don't know, 19 or 20-year-old in toys and stuff that I didn't know all of them, because the stuff that had come up since I was a kid. And one day, this like 8-year-old boy came in and asked for an action figure. And it was from the kind of brand that just had like an entire like wall of action figures. So I said, which one? And the boy told me the entire mythology and backstory of this character. And I was gobsmacked. I was like, wow, this is a lot of information.
Yeah.
However, I still didn't know which action figure he wanted because I had thought when I said which one, he would tell me if the character had a red shirt or a blue shirt, blonde hair, brown hair, like that.
Yeah.
So, after hearing the whole mythology, I did sort out which actual toy he wanted, and we got that solved. But I went home to my parents that night and I was like, told them all about it. And I was like, my gosh, imagine if this was something useful. That kid had all of this information in his head. Imagine if that was something really useful. And that was one of those moments that made me go, huh, here's a thing. Here's a different way to do a thing. And as I continued on in my major, when I had writing assignments, I tended to do things that were sometimes story driven for, I would say probably it was more like teen, like, I don't know, young adult
Yeah.
um, at that point, but that idea of like educational stuff was in my head.
Yeah. Huh. That's that's so funny. I feel like that's such an awesome story and like for that to have sparked that idea for you. And I think it makes so much sense that it kind of feels like such a follow through of like your career. I mean, reading Rainbow, obviously, Cyberchase. I'm curious because you said your mom was a math teacher, right? So um I know that you took on a lot of different roles on Cyberchase over the years. Um, story editor, voice director, many different types and levels of producer. Um, what was that process like? I mean, how did you like first get involved with Cyberchase and which part of it was like your favorite? Which role that you got to have?
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I got involved in Cyberchase because one of the executive producers at the time, Kristen Martin, I had worked with her a few years prior on a project, and but I had known her from my first job, actually. She and her husband both worked for the company at various times that did Reading Rainbow. And so I
Mm-hmm.
got to meet Kristen and her husband, Hugh Martin, and stayed in touch. This was me learning about networking before I actually knew that I was learning about networking,
Yeah.
sort of staying in touch with people. And so I worked with Kristen a few years prior, and when the original producer on the show was leaving after season one, um, I got a call, and Kristen was like, hey, we need a producer, and I think you should apply. And I was like, cool. May I remind you that I have not done animation or actually scripted narrative fiction? Because I had been doing live action unscripted in a variety of ways for kids, for general audience. And Kristen said an amazing thing that you don't often hear. She said, you're a good producer. You'll figure it out. I'll teach you.
Wow.
So she really, I'm a big fan of transferable skills because she was able to recognize that because she herself, I think, had also done that. She had a very diverse career path. And so that, put me into Cyberchase. I thought I would be there for a year or two. And then I stayed for 13 years. Um,
Wow.
and, the reason was that it was a show on which I could really grow. And having prior to Cyberchase, I had a period of freelancing, which was great and also really positive growth experience in a variety of ways. But I was longing for being involved in a production from soup to nuts, which is, I got some of that at Reading Rainbow. And as a freelancer, though, you're brought on typically for the least amount of time that is feasible.
Mm,
So sometimes you are involved in developing a thing, but mostly it's like a thing has been developed and they need to execute it and make it.
right.
And that's when freelancers come in. So Cyberchase gave me the opportunity to be involved in a series from initial conception of the ideas for the episode. I came in at episode 27. There's well over 100 now. I was
Wow.
101 or 105, something like that. And so I was just I was came in as the producer and learned about animation and learned how transferable my skills really were, because whether you're scouting locations in the real world, or drawing them, whether you're meeting people telling their stories in documentary or developing characters in a story, the essential thing is that you have to know what your story is about. You have to know who your characters are. You have to know what those places are, whether you draw them or scout them in person. So it was really those conceptual vision things that transferred very directly for me and made it possible for me to really connect with animation and not feel like I was doing something that was beyond what I had done, like different, bad, unconnected from what I had done before. Um, and I also got to do, because Cyberchase from the beginning was designed to be, I guess what we now call transmedia show, which was that the website and games were integral to the experience of the show.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember the games, so
Yeah.
clearly.
So I got to work on the games and the website as well. Worked initially working with the interactive producer on the show, David Hermes. And then after he moved on to another position in the company, we hired other producers and I had also changed roles somewhere in there. And then I would oversee the work of the digital team, making games, updating, maintaining the website and making apps too.
Oh, nice. Cool. Cool. That's awesome. And I love what you said also about I think it's a popular thing, obviously, particularly recently to talk about, but it is so true that like when you say that the skills when you jumped into animation ended up being transferable, I think it's often a point people try to make that storytelling is storytelling, whether it's real people or animated characters, right? So it's great that someone gave you that opportunity to jump into it and felt like those skills would be transferable, um, and that they ultimately were, because at the core, storytelling is storytelling. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the to me the essence of, what a producer does is, it is telling stories, but it's making things happen, whether it is a story or a budget or a schedule or whatever. You have to have all of those skills. And I know there's like 75 different kinds of producers, but to me, a producer is somebody who can do all of that. And that is being able to, look when you're hiring people. I think it's true in children's media. There's a lot more people now who are like, yes, I want to be in children's media, but that's not always the case. Some people do come to that later. And um, when you're a hiring manager, when you're staffing up, you have to be able to, just like you evaluate talent and locations and stories and script, you have to be able to evaluate people in a way that allows you to look at what they've done and see how they can fit in. And one thing that I look for when hiring people who are, new to the industry, I'll say, whether it's early in their career or a career change, is if somebody has a demonstrated interest in kids, like if they've had jobs that show that that's something they connect with. Besides working in the toy department, for example, I worked in a day camp, um,
Mm-hmm.
and I was a babysitter. And like kids were on my radar. Like
Right.
I liked kids,
Right.
they're fun. It was I liked doing all of that stuff. And I have found that people who want to work with kids often have worked with kids in one way or another in a volunteer capacity or in like summer or part-time jobs during school. Like they're already making, that interest is there.
Right.
And I also think that people who have done like camp counseling of any kind usually make really good production assistants on set. because they know how to wrangle people, little children. That is
Yeah,
a particular skill set.
totally, totally. I love that. So yeah, I am curious, and I think so we're talking a lot about like the transitions from live action to animation and kind of the similarities there. Um, we advertise ourselves as a cartoon animation podcast, and yet we break the rule all the time because we have so many people on with such cool careers that also obviously go into live action, because that's cool too. So I'm going to break the rule a little bit again, but I'm curious. You've obviously really had, as part of your career, a really important role in like keeping the legacies of like really important live action shows and really important people alive, I mean, obviously right now at Fred Rogers Productions, kind of keeping Fred Rogers' legacy alive through the work that you all do and stuff like that. And even, you started out reading Rainbow, and I went a couple of months ago to a screening of the Butterfly in the Sky documentary, and I saw you in it. So kind of maintaining a connection to that and LeVar Burton as well, and all the great work that that show did. They're like really big people and really big, shows and really big histories. Does that ever like feel like a lot of pressure? Or is it, just like purely rewarding? Like, what's that experience like to be involved in keeping like such big legacies alive?
Um, well, I think that it's joyful. Um, I think, Reading Rainbow was my first job, also my first or second internship, but my first production internship, which was just like 3 days on a shoot when they were in Boston. But it was really a foundational experience for me. That job was like going to grad school. Like I really got to immerse myself in kids' media and actually in practice see day-to-day decisions that get made and how they get made and what people think about, which was amazing. And I think that the legacy there is I don't know. It's wonderful to talk to people who watched the show. And the filmmakers who made Butterfly in the Sky were kids who watched Reading Rainbow and decided to get into documentary filmmaking because of it,
Mm,
which is like the most beautiful expression of what that show could achieve. Um,
yeah.
and with Fred Rogers working at FRP, it could be daunting if I let myself ruminate too much, I suppose. But um, when I started at FRP in 2016, the website was set up so that everybody's bio also had like a little anecdote about what Mr. Rogers meant to them. And although I was a child who watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and watched Sesame Street, I didn't watch them all the time. I don't know if that was, I'm the youngest of four. I don't think I had a lot of TV control at very
Right.
young. But I did watch the shows, but I didn't have like something to say at the same level of everybody else. And I was kind of like, oh gosh, what do I say? And how do I say something that's also just fresh from what other people have said beyond like just the obvious impact of this person who had this amazing show? And we have in our office a lot of photos of Fred, but there's one picture in particular where he is sitting on the plaid couch wearing like reading glasses with pile of papers in his hands and a pen. So he's clearly like marking up a script or something. And I was really struck by that photo because it's a behind the scenes picture. There's a lot of posed photos of of Fred as Mr. Rogers. There's a lot of posed
Yeah.
photos of Fred as Fred. But this was like the first photo that I saw, and it's just like a really great snapshot of him working. And it's clearly this is a person who is working. And that sounds very simplistic, I appreciate, but it was mind blowing because of watching Mr. Rogers growing up. He was not a person with a job that I could see, right? He was this very friendly neighbor on television. And so when I got to FRP and was confronted with this question of how do I talk about my connection to his legacy, to think about him as a person with a job who had an extraordinary vocation as he looked at it. But he was a person with a job who said, I want to make children's TV at the time, and that's what I'm going to do with my life. That I could relate to. And
Yeah.
that was an interesting way because I think that, when we talk about people who are heroes and who are iconic, as Fred Rogers is, or Jim Henson, it's very easy to, I think, get lost, to forget their humanity because what we know as the public is their public selves, which is kind of perfect generally.
Right.
And it's like, it's much more interesting. And I think from what I've gotten to know from my colleagues who work directly with Fred for many years, many people, is how deeply human he was. And that's what was interesting to him. And so, when I think about that legacy, um, I don't have an answer to what would Fred Rogers do today. I don't have an answer for what would he do about X. I know what he has done. I know what he did in his life. I can talk to people who know more about choices that he made, and that's always fascinating. But I don't try to position myself. I'm not him.
Right.
I'm
Right.
making choices. I take my inspiration from work that he did. I take my inspiration from my experiences and I look for those commonalities. And that's how we have tried to, you know, um, not Fred Rogers Productions is a nonprofit. So we are mission and impact oriented. And
Right.
that's how we make choices. And we go back to thinking about what are the things that we can do to honor his legacy. That's part of our mission. And to create content that models kindness, respect, and an enthusiasm for learning and earns the trust of parents and caregivers. How do you get beyond like the surface level storylines, phrasing or dialogue? Like, how do you really develop so that you're saying the most, the things that are going to connect with kids the most? Funny things, meaningful things, heartfelt things, all the ways. It's not
Yeah.
about like a serious, earnest tone. It's about connecting with kids and respecting kids for who they are, and also just being clear on how you want to communicate with them and not being, you know, caught in the trap of making something for yourself as a 5-year-old because you don't actually know what you were like as a 5-year-old.
That is such a good point. I mean, I feel like people are, people so often say, like, oh, they feel nostalgic for the things that they grew up with, which is also very much the premise of our podcast. So it's not a bad thing. Nostalgia
No,
has a great
yeah.
place, but it is such a good point. And it's also like, I don't know, this generation in so many ways is already like so different, that serving kids really means like where are the kids of now at, not like where were you at when you were a kid. So I think that's
Well,
really interesting.
I mean, I think uh, to clarify, there's a couple of things embedded in
Hmm.
this. One is, like from a child development point of view, kids do evolve, kids grow the way they've always grown. There's a lot of really core understanding of how kids grow that is the same. The environment that they're in has changed
Right.
drastically. The way, a 15-year-old versus a 5-year-old, that 5-year-old is having a radically different experience than that 15-year-old did. But it's, I think that sometimes people just get um, distracted by an idea that hasn't been fully explored with kids. It's good to be, I am inspired by my own childhood, by my own experiences. are helpful to tap into. We all do that in telling stories, I think. That's how you can find things that are true is by observing other people, children in some cases, or adults, and observing on your own memories. But it's that thing of like, you have to interrogate and make sure that you're not depending on things that maybe are more perfect in your memory,
Yeah.
or um, depending on just the idea of, our child development advisors at FRP, when I first got to Daniel Tiger, like multiple times they were like, um, you might think that happened when you were 4, but it probably, like, you might be remembering something from when you were 7 or 8.
Yeah, so
Like,
true.
the idea of really, like, when you watch very young children, especially, there's a lot of stuff they're learning, a lot of stuff that they're learning. But what they're processing and really getting and remembering may not be what you think.
Right.
And it is the brilliance of Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood that it's actually designed for very young children, not for grown-ups. And the pace is a conscious choice, that Angela Santamero made in, again, honoring the work of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and what resonated for her as a young child with that show, but being conscious of choosing a pace and choosing a way of communicating key ideas and feelings in a way that actually a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old is going to connect and remember and have those um, ideas be
Yeah.
meaningful. Like, it's just come from them. Like, the number of times we've gotten emails from parents and caregivers who are like, out of the blue, their child used a Daniel Tiger strategy, which is the little song,
Yeah.
in an unexpected circumstance is like truly would fill a book. It's those stories are designed purposefully, and the songs, so that a child is going to be able to remember them and is going to be able to use them in their life without prompting, with prompting from an adult, but also without.
That's awesome. That's so cool. That's like such proof that the retention is like totally there, which is awesome. And as you were alluding to, probably the work of a lot of people with a lot of expertise. So
Oh,
yeah,
the
yeah, that's really
wordsmithing that
cool.
goes on is intense and awesome because it really does get you to a place of something that is more meaningful and more useful. And that's the challenge as writers in particular, is to find the thing that is actually sticky and memorable. I don't like when idioms are used in scripts. I try to avoid that. I don't like superlatives because it feels empty.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if often there is another word that will describe the feeling, describe express the idea more clearly. And that's core for, the sort of emotional growth of humans at any age, honestly. We do a lot of naming emotions in the stories in every show. And
Yeah.
writers are always like, do we have to name the emotion again here? And it's like, yeah, I mean, find a way to make it sound natural, but it's hugely helpful when you have all these big feelings to be able to say what they are. And then once you can label it and name it, you can know it and you can manage it. And that goes into, Mr. Rogers or Fred Rogers quote. I think this was probably talking to adults. It gets shorthanded as um, you may have heard people say that Fred said, "What's mentionable is manageable." But
Mm-hmm.
his quote is longer, and I pulled it earlier when I was preparing for this because I thought it's worth talking about. His full quote from Fred Rogers was, "Anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone."
I love that.
Yeah. And to me, that is also the bridge to making content for older kids. For
Yeah.
6 8 to 11, 11 to 14, I'm very interested in, and we are developing projects, shows for older kids because I think that there's programs out there that do this, but there's not enough. And I think that people connect with stories, and this is where the future of our industry. People always connect with stories that they can relate to, that feel true.
Yeah.
And we can tell those stories if we have that intentionality. And I often say to the teams, if a kid watching a show says at some point, watching a character, sometimes I feel that way too, then we've done our job because it's about connecting, it's about modeling, it's about showing that you are not alone. You are not the only person who feels that way. Other people feel that way. You can, which leads to a whole bunch of things, but you can manage that. You can understand that. Um, and
Yeah.
it's really, really about growth in that way. If kids have, and all humans have the vocabulary and the uh, comfort, I would also say, to describe what they're feeling, then they can talk about it and figure it out. There's also Fred Rogers had a song, "What Do You Do with the Mad That You Feel?" which
Yeah.
apparently in one of the books I read, I think that came from a child said that to Fred. What
Oh,
do you do with the mad that you feel? And it's brilliant. It's a
yeah.
brilliant question. It's brilliant that he picked up on it because it acknowledges that you have a feeling. The feeling has a name. You can do something about that feeling if you choose. And what will that be?
Yeah. Wow. Well, all of what you're saying is so interesting and really speaks to the power of like not talking down to kids, meeting kids where they're at, um, having kids be able to see themselves in the emotions and the stories that they're watching. And I think that's so powerful, and I think it's such a beautiful way to end. So thank you so much. This has been such an interesting conversation.
Yeah, thank you for asking and it's wonderful it's always a joy to talk about what we do.
Thanks for tuning in to Cartoon Creators. We would love if you connected with us on one of our social media channels. Have a comment, question, or an idea for a guest we should bring on to the pod? Email us at info@cartooncreators.com. Both words starting with a K, of course.